Okay, so today's Future Short is about genetics, so here's my timer, 3 minutes, here we go. I wanted to talk about genetics partly because it's around 10 years since the completion of the Human Genome Project, and that period was really the moment when I became interested in genetic technology. I began reading about the possibilities of this brave new world and the era of genetic science giving rise to the birth of designer children, which was a prominent feature of the debates back then, and I think still shapes people's imaginations about that technology and what it means for society to have access to that kind of knowledge. Today, however, we know much more about genetics. We know they're much more complex than were imagined back then, and the kinds of achievements that have been made through genetic science have been much more measured. So debates about designer children, I think this possible era of genetically superior people is all but over, but I think the ethical debates have become much more interesting because of that. So we now find ourselves talking about the future of genetic information within society, less about genetic modification. And I think the bigger questions that confront us today have to do with the circulation of genetic information, and in particular the rise of commercial tests for characteristics that aren't even health related, or at least are only partially health related. You take, for example, your capacity to run long distances. There may be any number of 125 genes associated with that capacity, but already there are genetic tests for single genes that claim to reveal whether you're more likely to be an endurance athlete or a power-based athlete. Now, this doesn't tell you whether you're going to be a gold medalist or an Olympic champion, but it's claiming to tell you whether you're more likely to be better at one thing or another. Now, what's important about that is that these tests are already available. This is not just futuristic scenarios that we're talking about. People are already having access to that information and are probably using it in a way that affects their lifestyle decisions. So the bigger question I think that society is faced with today has to do with the use of this genetic information, how far we're prepared to use information that is only a partial impression of our own biology or indeed our life chances. We find ourselves in a situation where this is currently reasonably unregulated, but the ways in which the information could be used are multiple. We can envisage retaining DNA from people of loved ones that have passed on in the hope that we might cultivate these cells in the future for some particular reason. Now, it's not to propose that these are ways of cloning individuals and bringing them back to life, but I think the bigger question that people have is the investment they make into this technology. And unless we find a way of helping people understand the limits of that information, then people resign themselves to genetic determinism and believe that everything resides in their genes, which it does not.